yo, hey, hey, yo, hina away, yo, hina away, yo, hina away, yo, hey, yo, hina away, yo, hina away, yo, hina away, yo, hey, yo, hina away, yo, hina away, yo, hina away, yo, hey, yo, hina away, yo.
Ai, mahalo nui ka akoko ana mai no ko kalami pāhiahia no ke ia kūpale moho kauka o kunei Twitchell no laila nui ko mako hauli ka ike hou ana iaia kona hele loa ana mai alaka mai. No laila e ho'omalu kako a e pule kako ke ho'omai ka i ho'onani kunei ia ai ka makua. No ko ke ia hola mako a koko nei no ke ia hana koʻikoʻi I kapa ia hoʻi he kūpale moho kauka a no leila ke kua. Nā hoʻi e haʻawi mai ka ike ka naʻauao I loko nā hana apau I loko o ke I mau hola e malama ia nei. A no leila ke kua. E aloha mai ʻoe ko mākou kānaka aloha ana ka mākou mau ʻolelo pakahi a pau. Ma ke ia ʻaina hoʻi o ke ia keiki o kunei o kona ʻaina hanau hoʻi a me kāna ʻolelo ma kuahine o ke ia ʻolelo Tlingit. E ane hoʻi e pilikia loa like me hoʻi ka mākou o Hawaiian nei. No leila ke kua, nau hoʻi haʻawi mai ke ia mau makana makamai a mākou e mālama ai pūlama. I hiki aku hoʻi ke ola hou aku I loko o nā hanauna nui e hiki mai ana. No leila ke kua I loko o ke mau hana lini mākou e mālama nei. Ma ke ia koleke o ka haka ʻula o Keʻeliko lani. O hiki mai hoi ke ia moho I ke ia anu. E kūpale aku I kāna pepa. Koʻikoʻi e hoʻike ana. Kona mau manaʻo nui, kāna aloha I kāna ʻolelo ponoʻi. No leila ke kua paola mai ko aloha. Paluna ona, a me ke komike, a me nā hoa pau I akoko mai e kako ai iaia. No leila I loko ke ia, ka mākou e pule nei, ke hoʻonani, hoʻomaikaʻi, ia ʻoe ka makua ma ka inoa ka makua ke keiki. A me ka ʻuhana e malele. Amen.
Aloha auina la kākou. Uristish. Mahalo ke ia hoʻea ana mai no ke kūpale pepa ana ke kahi haumana e polo peka mua oia a ka ke imi nei oe ke kekele kauka. Good afternoon to everyone who's here in the building and also to our many friends listening to us through technology back home in Alaska and other parts perhaps. Today we will have doctoral dissertation defense by ʻUnei Lance Twitchell, an associate professor of Alaska Native Languages at the University of Alaska Southeast. The name of his dissertation is Haa Dachx Sáani Kagéiyi Yís Ha Yu Tangi Ke Nesin for our little grandchildren, language revitalization among the Tlingit. Professor Twitchell is the first Native American from North America to ever defend a dissertation at Kahaka'ula Keʻeliko lani, and most importantly, the first Tlingit to ever defend a dissertation here. So it's a great event that we're having. We will proceed by first by introducing the members of his committee. We have Dr. Scott Saft from here at Kahaka'ula Keʻeliko lani. We also have Dr. Kaunoi Kamana from Kahaka'ula Keʻeliko lani. Myself, Dr. William H. Wilson from Kahaka'ula Keʻeliko lani. And then we are very honored to have as our external member, Dr. Maria Williams of the University of Alaska, Anchorage, herself a Tlingit. So it's great to have this committee. The way we will proceed is Professor Twitchell will present his dissertation in the form of a PowerPoint in short, and then our committee members will ask questions. We'll then open up the floor for questions from our visitors, our people outside of Hawaii, and then for those in the committee, in the audience who wish to maybe ask some questions as well. Upon the completion of the questions, the committee will retire to a nearby location to discuss whether the candidate meets the requirements for the degree, and then we will return to share with the candidate the outcome of our decision. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce again our candidate, Associate Professor ʻUnei Lance Twitchell.
Hello.
Aloha kakau.
Aloha.
Mahalo no ko a ko hele mai. O kone ko I noa. He oiwi wau a me ka Tlingit, Haa Dachx, Yupik, Sami. Ya o au I ka makau o lelo I na kanaka Tlingit. He mai kai ke iki Ia'a o kou. O ka'u pepa nui kea. Guns cheese await at the cut Yuhan. Tachwasa ach tu yek ea yagi. Es chachat ea yag. Ya ach tlilk o hasse. Chacha asa adutsa ach I has aus tu ha yuch atangi. Haa Dachx Sáani Kagéiyi Yís. Ha yuch atangi ke naltsim. Tlingit enach I idech ak watan. We kashuk ta kach shechit. Det kach enach. Wasi tu agesigu kukitu kakakwati. We kakan khuz. Kach kau degan. We kaki dia nachlitzin a we kagan. Gwash it tuk. Ye owe a des panugu ye katu nigu ku'u. Wuj in gachtu senech ko'a we tu nigu. Igu aya khwan. Kaka kwatil te kat yuhan. Haa Dachx Sáani ya a kawe yandig ye gachtu senech. Gwash niukdein yuch ay kek. De awe. We chune diach yuch atangi awe hi chwach sati. Ka niuk awe kuchte gugigud gugwadugud I ide. Eka at awe kusachan. At sati aya tullaan. Gwash kusachan ka tullaan dad yuch ayitan. Ko a kishuk nuch. Kes ayach awe. Kes ka nach ik Ye awe ach I wududle tu. Ach tu asuku ke hagach litzini. Achawe adat yuch ak kwatan. Kachwasa shtuka khatati. Achawe ya ach in ach awe achitas de shinuch. Wuch in aya yegach tu sane khat ka achshat. Naskinachroe achretki ka ukeki. Has Kagéiyi Yís awe ye jichwane. Ya ach ish. Ya ach kla has ka ach kik. Awe ach nak haswu art.
Hayuqatangi awa wuch eat uwashuteyi. Hashaka uhan Haa Dachx yan. Hayuqatangi Hestasa ayah kuge. Hayuqatangi Hestas awuch itika kwaha. Haskhasahan kahastuya ay awukhane. Ya hayuqatangi dat ye jene. Wuch in ye gachtutlaq. Wuch in ye gachtutlaq. Wan qanins tunigu awa ye haye jene khukh. Shwitl chun ke wush witl chuni. Akatsa yaqatu ti. Heshtuhini at awa hayuqatangi. Hajiyis wututlayech. Hashagun has awaya. Haa Dachx Sáani Kagéiyi Yís awa hayuqatangi. Tlingit awa agudach yuqatangi awa adach qudzati. Kleina ki de qulgazi. Akhu achakut yede yus at ku achakleki at awa tlingit. Agudach sawe we tlingit yuqatangi qatutlitsini at ayu. Was take 100 tlingit qenach yuqalla at ki qudzati yidat. Ku nask jinkat kadeen has aushaguk shakte. Shiatihin tlingit qenach yuqalla at ki awes with the shan. Ka hanak yus ya at katu Kagéiyi Yís atutle yechi ku wan qanins wasa kunna shle ye awaha juni. Anach dak kam duwas uwu ye awaha anika kudzati. Ku achakleki awe wuhan tlingit. Tleki tlingit awe. Na lle awe tlingit yuqatangi wudishku gudeyi. Ku ahel ulti. Ye jine etinach kayati. Shakshani marj datsan ye yawaka. Hel ituwuj ulchi shik. Wasa ishandain hakawashu kekelka tuwa ushkuha yuqatangi. We adatrik awa kunach hastu yi tu sanuk. We tletka ku atlatu. Wasa ishandain haskawshu. Hastu shantuk ayas jindanain. Hastu tuwasagu qutwatu waqi awaha yuqatangi qahaqasti. Hasakawa hasaini. Has awaskuan. Wasaha hlitsinen. Wasaha hlitsin yidat. Akhu awe gled qach hasayawadlaq. Akhu awe gled qach hashayawadlaq. Aqa awe. Akhu tlingit. Qoneha yuqatangi naqhas uwa at. Qaneh awe hasfu at. Astu tuwu hlitsin qahas katusheq. Akhu yuqatangi dat. Yan has uwa naq. Achaweha yuqatangi qudzati Yesu. Astu tuwu hlitsini ka shtuqa hadati. Atuwasagu awa atunach awagudi awa watushaguk. Haa Yís agach tu Tlingit, Haa Dachx Sáani Kagéiyi Yís. Ka jak ti awa ya waka. Hastu itik akidich aya hasati uhan yagi. Ye aya adatach detan chach. Ajaya wa etsu etuutu tachwasach ashitzin. Ajaya adat ihansu yagi de. Ye awa yidat squatleka kainach aya ide kakwanik dasa awe chachshechit. So I'll switch to English and talk about some things that I worked on in this dissertation. I wanted to start with ʻŌlelo Hawaii because I'm on your land and I studied with many of your people, some of you in this room, your teachers, and some of the teachers' teachers. And so I say, I'm very grateful for this opportunity. When I set about thinking about the state of the Tlingit language, we did some assessments and we realized we have about 100 speakers left in the whole world. There's maybe 25,000 Tlingit people, and of those 100, we think maybe 20 can really fully fluently speak. And so we thought about a question for this dissertation, which was, if that's the case, then how would we get to maybe 3,000 in 30 years? How could you go from 100 to 3,000? And so I look at the narrative of ʻŌlelo Hawaii, and I say, well, that's huge, so we could do li'i, a little bit. But when we thought about it, the first thing that I thought about was historical traumas and what has happened to Tlingit people. And a lot of that revolves around documenting some things from elders. There is a linguist named Michael Krauss, and I met him in Honolulu at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And he said, one thing you've got to do is you got to go document these old people, and they'll tell you what happened to them, because nobody's going to believe you. And when they're gone, you're not going to have that story. And if you can get it in your language, that would be best. And so the one who gets the most credit for sharing her story is Chakshani Marge Dudson, who is about 93 years old and who I've had the honor of working closely with for about the last 4 or 5 years, along with one of her relatives, Kahwan George Davis. And I asked her, she had told me her story, and I asked her if she would tell it in Tlingit. And it took her 2 different tries, and she really wanted to make sure that the story started with this very specific phrase in Tlingit, which was, it's impossible for you to feel how much we suffered when people didn't want our language. And then I documented some other narratives from a variety of elders who talk about a number of different things: being hit, being picked up by their hair, being told that they are inferior, being told that no matter how hard they tried, they were always going to be second-class citizens, about people being made to stick their tongues on metal light poles or flagpoles in a very cold day in the wintertime. And then there was these 2 Haole school teachers who wrote a book. And in the book, one of them bragged about figuring out which chemicals would work best because it's bitter and it burns the mouths of children and would keep them from speaking their language. So you might think, why would I want to look at that kind of stuff? Because I think it has these residual effects today. A lot of our people back home can understand the Tlingit language, but it's very hard for them to talk. Some of them who are brave enough tell us, if I talk, someone's going to come and hit me. So that was the first section, and there's another portion that's related to it, which is for a good part of the United States' history in Alaska. Alaska Native people were not allowed to vote. But then when they were allowed to vote, because of a Tlingit man named Shkundi, William Paul, and his work, they developed these citizenship tests where you couldn't vote unless you were considered civilized. And in order to be civilized, you had to sign a document saying you wouldn't speak your language and you wouldn't live with your own people. You would have to find a white person who would sign as that, attest to it, and then you'd have to find 5 other white people who would also sign this paper saying that you were living like a white person. Because if you didn't do that, they would take your children and send them to boarding schools. And these boarding schools, sometimes they were okay, but sometimes they were horrible, where children were abused in every way you can imagine, including murder. And so, in order to keep your children home, because William Paul had also worked on desegregating schools, but in order to go to that school, you had to be considered civilized, and then you had to abandon your language. So after documenting some of that, we sort of look at this other question, which is, we teach people Tlingit, and we've been doing so for probably 50 years at a pretty intense rate. And we've probably only produced a handful of people that can actually talk. And so even if 30 people came to a Tlingit language class, maybe 2 or 3 would end up being able to speak. And so I come here and I see people just speaking all the time, and I think, well, what's the barrier? What's the hill that folks are having a hard time getting over? Tlingit has lots of sounds. It has a fun grammar system, and fun is my code word for hard. And it's got lots of sounds. Like you could say things like little swan, which would be and that's hard for some people to say. The language itself makes lots of shifts. It has lots of metaphors built into it. But I think it's not because it's hard. I think there are other things there that are subsurface and that really have to do with people having a hard time connecting with their language, and especially colonized part of the United States. I think at the core, people feel like they might be doing something wrong when they're speaking their language. They also might be dealing with some things about white supremacy, where since the beginning, colonizers have insisted that they're superior beings and everything else is inferior. So we tried to look at how do we measure fluency in Tlingit, and so one of the things we've been examining is what can we do to get adults speaking faster and also understanding faster and feeling more confident. And so we've been talking a lot about these things. And in this dissertation, I kind of outline a number of processes, but I don't get into a great deal of specifics because I don't want to be telling my own people, here's what you need to do. But I want to tell them, here's what we need to figure out how to do. And then the step after this dissertation is going back and forming very strong working groups, because we are fragmented. We tend to look at our language sometimes as sort of copywritten material. This thing belongs to this group, and this thing belongs to this group. And then sometimes those groups don't like each other. So we're trying to overcome a little bit of that. And then we're trying to sort of give people a clearer vision of how to acquire the language, because we don't want language learning to be mystical. We don't want it to be this unknown thing. We want it to be a very clear process, because our languages are sacred, and our languages are important, and our languages are irreplaceable. But they are a language, and so it functions like a lot of other languages. And so we try to, some people like to say, well, Tlingit is the only language that has this, and it's the only language on earth that has this, and it's the hardest language in the universe. And so we try to push back on that a little bit and say, it's just a language. Anybody can learn this. And one of our elders back home, Kingisi, David ánx'i, continues to tell us, he says, if you say that learning Tlingit is difficult, then it's going to be difficult because you will believe it. And so it's this sort of thing where we're trying to shift some of the ways, and so some of it is just saying a different word, but also trying to spend some time with second language learners and adults and figure out what kinds of pain they might have when it comes to our language, or shame, what kinds of feelings they might have in terms of maybe they feel like they're not doing enough, or they're not enough. So it's a delicate sort of operation to try and balance encouragement and also just saying, oh, we need to do more, more, more. So I studied a variety of languages and organizations that estimate how long it takes to learn a language. And then I wanted to sort of get an estimate for Tlingit, not to just sort of say, well, the primary purpose is probably to let folks know, if you want to learn a language, you can't do it just an hour a day. You can't do it just, 4 hours a week. You have to realize how much time it takes. And for highly endangered languages, one thing that we talked about a lot in our program here was the concept of domain loss. And so domains are places where a language is used. It's a social or physical space. And as you lose domains, you lose your ability to use your language on a daily basis. And so what we see with a lot of indigenous languages is then pretty soon the only place your language is used is in your cultural ceremonies, and then every act of language is a ceremony, and then you can't tell fart jokes anymore, and then nobody's using the language because it's too sacred. And so this is why we say it's a sacred thing, but it's not this thing that we can't use, because we saw some of our elders saying that too, and I don't want to argue with what some of our elders say. But I say, well, how do you say, because we wanted to raise our babies in Tlingit, there's several of us that wanted to do this. And so I have bilingual children, I have 3 of them. They all know our language. In terms of whether they'll become speakers or not, time will tell. But they talk to me, and they talk and they figure out how to say things, and they're always thinking about it. They can understand our language at a fluent level. But one of the things that we think about is we would ask some folks, how do you say, wipe your butt? Because that's something you have to say sometimes, especially to kids. If you're saying that to adults, something might be wrong. To kids, we want to say, and one of the responses we got was, we don't use our language for that. And I thought, well, I think we do, because another thing that happened with the Tlingit language is a lot of the documentation that happened was by missionaries. And so their goal was not really to keep our language going, but it was to use our language as a vehicle to assimilate us into their way of thinking. And so what happened is, in English, there's a lot of things that are embarrassing to talk about. And so one of my colleagues said, well, that verb dictionary they made has everything. And I said, well, maybe not everything. He says, well, what doesn't it have? I said, well, you can't poop, and you can't pee, and you can't make more people. And I know how to say those things, and they're not in there. And sometimes you need to say those things, because maybe you need to say, hey, don't make more people, you're not ready. So another area that we took a look at, that I took a look at, was this idea of what steps do you need to take to bring a language back from a place where it's not being used very much. And so one area is to sort of start mapping out what areas you need to make into bilingual areas again, or multilingual areas, because in Southeast Alaska, we have 4 languages. So we have English, a foreign language. We have Tlingit, an indigenous language. We have Hakil, an indigenous language. And we have Smalgiach, an indigenous language. So one of the things that we try to push back on, there was a really neat thing that somebody taught me here in Hawaii, which was you could push something back on someone if you don't want it. Like someone says, hey, you're primitive. And you'll say, you're primitive, right? And so that's really good. I like that. Sometimes people say, you Tlingits are mean. I was like, did you see what you guys did? And so sometimes I use that technique, but other times too I'm conscious of, we don't want to do some of the things that they did. So if they say, our language is better than yours, I don't want to say, well, my language is better than yours. I just want to say, no language is better than any language. It's like no race is better than any other race. And so really trying to avoid using some of the colonizers' tools to just think like them. As Graham Smith tells us as well. Work with them really close, colonizers, but don't give them tools to become better at assimilating you, because that's what their systems are designed to do. So some of the things that we did is, in this case it's a we, because some of my predecessors, Richard Dowenhauer, and ʻUnei, my grandma, Nora Dowenhauer, they took a look at these steps that people lay out on how to bring your language, or how to determine where your language is in terms of strength. And so they wanted to achieve diglossia, which means two languages are used, but one is considered kind of maybe not as socially powerful. And so we would like to be at the point where, Tlingit could be the language of the street and the home, and then maybe English can still be the language of business, but then we'll take that over too. So, and this is really on our land, and so we try to map these things out and then figure out, how do we do this? And so some of the projects I have with students is figure out where our language doesn't exist, figure out how to get it into that realm. Because we are Tlingit people, we're coastal people, we've been cutting and eating and smoking and trading fish forever. And then we went to a language immersion camp, and I realized that we did not have a method of talking about cleaning fish. And what that revealed to me was that there's just these realms where we stopped talking about things, and we would switch over to English, making drums. So whenever we would do something, we would switch to English because we weren't sure how to instruct. And so what we're trying to do now is map out those areas and just start taking groups of people in there and just sort of taking them so that we can do these things in a bilingual way. And we're creating shifts. When I first started working at the University of Alaska Southeast, I wrote a letter on behalf of a student, and I signed it, ʻUla, which means thank you, and then my name underneath it, right? And then my title, which is what you're supposed to do. And so the response I got was, Dear ʻUla, and so my name became thank you, and so, but now people know that, the people that I work with at the university, so it's like if you said mahalo at the end of your email, and they said, Dear mahalo, right? And so we're getting there. But another thing that we did is we started to think of, there's some portions of this dissertation, and one is coming up with a 30-year plan for Tlingit. In 30 years, where do we want our language to be? And so there's a number of different components in this 30-year plan, and it's kind of driven by a couple of indigenous theories that were developed here in this building with Deho, Jeremy Green, and Tinekpangi, Jimmy Teria, what's his last name? And Tinekpangi is from Guam, and Deho is from Six Nations, and also with Scott Saft and with Hilo and Larry and others. We just talked about, well, how do we kind of indigenize the field of linguistics? Because we noticed there's a lot of linguists who come and work with us, but there's something we want to do to bridge linguistics and the people. Because a lot of times linguists will write stuff and nobody understands what it means. Even like people who fluently speak our language, like, I don't know what this means. And so when I first interviewed for this program, I said, well, I've always wanted to write a paper called Linguists Are Humans Too, because they always talk and we can never understand them. And everybody laughed, and then they said, well, we're all linguists. And so I said, well, I'm sorry. But just thinking of how do you make the process of learning a language and using a language more straightforward? And so some of the things that we did is we started to assess what's going on in our communities. Who's teaching the language? Are they teaching it in the community? Are they teaching it in the school? Are they trying to make a daycare? Are there university classes? And so I started mapping that stuff out and figuring out, how do we tie this network more closely together? How do we make sure that if somebody wants to learn Tlingit, that we've taken care of all of the reasons why they can't? And so I used to say we're getting rid of the excuses, but I try not to say that anymore, because it's the other thing that I push back on is this idea that we would do it, but we're lazy. We would do it, but there's all these ways, I think, that the colonizer's seeds have been planted, and their forest continues to say, you're inferior and you can't. Because one of the most dangerous things about colonization, and I had some conversations about colonization that I think were really effective in helping me understand its process. So I would say colonization is not an abstraction, it's a reality. And so if you look across the world, there were some very common steps that were taken to colonize people. And this is more than just we want to build a village on your land. This is we want to take all the land and we want to erase you. And the way that erasure happens is first, I think, and I don't know if it's not like this one first, this one second, but as I just sort of think about it, some of the things that happen, not in any particular order, is identifying the warrior society and getting rid of it so that men no longer understand what their role is. And they are also unable to protect their villages, their people, their land. Then you start to rape and murder the women. And you've taken those warrior societies out so no one can stop you. And a lot of indigenous groups, they get their identity through their mothers. My great-grandpa, ánx'i de my mother's father's father, his English name was Bert Dennis. He used to say, there used to be so many of us, our clan, and you get your clan through your mother. He said, but then the Navy came, and they built a base here on our land. That's when we started noticing our women washing up on the shore, dead, wrapped in seaweed. And now there's hardly any of us left. So the next thing that they do is they separate the people in their land. They want you to be so that your land is a foreign thing to you. You go to the grocery store, don't go out hunting, don't go out fishing. We have a lot of people who have held on to that way of life. And then they take your language, because that is one of the things that roots people in the language. The language is the thing that roots the people to the earth. And so when we were here, and we were staying with Larry, who we affectionately called the Godfather, and he said, all these people wear these Aloha Aina shirts. It's like, let me see your hands. You got dirt in your fingernails. You've been working on the land. And so we really like that because we've got indigenous ways of thinking about how we connect to the landscape. So one of my clan relatives, Donna Walk, Austin Hammond, he used to say, because in Alaska we get these really tall mountains and there's these trees that go way up high. Snow, that's the first place it snows. It's really windy up there. If you guys want to come visit, you can come look in. But he said, you look at those trees up there. You know how those trees can live way up on top of that mountain? It's because underneath the soil, their root system is just like holding hands. And that's how we are through our language and our culture. So we use those as benchmarks to think about what we're going to try to do. And as we map out what we're going to try to do, we also have these kind of theories about you have to be hyper aware because the act of colonization is everywhere. And it's always trying to keep you from doing what your ancestors might want you to do. So we have these phrases that we utilize to say, which is, it's hard to literally translate it, but it really means we're going to just imitate our ancestors. So we took a look, and then I just sort of wanted to develop these let's go get them type of phrases. And so some of the things I try to share with my community back home is, if you wait for change, it will never come. A system like education that's designed to destroy families, languages, and culture cannot be fixed, but must be replaced by a system that is under indigenous control. So the term for this is usually university within university models. Like we'll build our own, we'll have our own schools, just like here. The genius of our people is limited by self-doubt and by allowing others to control our education and therefore our destiny. We could become world leaders in language revitalization and self-governed education and there is no sovereignty that compares to thinking in your own language. So there's also inspiration to be drawn by our relatives way down south. A Maori, he says, his name is Moana Jackson. He says, if times change, can we make new realities too? Can we also dare to be brave and long once again to be free? If there is anything that we need to reclaim most of all in translating the ideas of mana motuhake, of self-determination into action, it is the belief in our right to be free. If colonization does more than anything else to damage our people, it is to make our people lose faith in ourselves. And so we sort of look at this stuff and we try to look around the world at what folks are doing in terms of decolonization, which is not a metaphor, it's a reality. And that reality is saying, we don't have to pick, because sometimes people will say, oh, what's it like for your kids to live in two worlds? It's like, what are you kidding? It's like, my kids just live in the world. And they have plurality, they could think in Tlingit and they could think in English, and they don't have to say, ooh, am I going to use my Tlingit brain for that? Because it's simultaneous. So I think there's also a great reduction into things. Is it this kind of thing or that kind of thing? You say, no, it doesn't work like that. It's complicated. So what are we going to do? Kingisi David Katzig is a Shangukidi elder, and he gave us these kind of 4 pillars of what we could build a new educational system upon. And those 4 pillars, he starts with Shinkitawewa. You are a human being. Tlingit, that means human being for us. Yaqidzige, you are intelligent. Shtakatat ayaqine, you are going to respect all things. Qaqitsaqqi'ah, you will listen to people. Wushiechiqahtutene, we're going to work on this together. And so this is kind of the pillars of an educational structure. And what we're going to do is build a P through 20 system. That's one of the components of what we're trying to do with our language back home, so that we have options from preschool all the way up to getting a doctoral in your language if you want to. But in Alaska, it's a little different because we have 20 languages, 20 indigenous languages in Alaska, all in various states of, right now, trouble, but on their way to a better place. So the other thing that we want to do is figure out, what do people need? I think I need to skip these ones. But we want to sort of, as we're thinking about where to go, we're going to help each other. We're going to help people, because it's hard to overcome trauma. We want to build our own indigenous institutions and continue to say, well, public institutions need to just do better. We want to create an economy for our language, so that when our people learn our language, we say, yes, you can get a job doing this. Because one of the things is, and we're going down that route. We have people who are language teachers in our communities, and then we're trying to develop other positions. So the radio station came and talked to me about putting Tlingit on the radio, and we had a wonderful conversation. And I said, well, at some point, you guys should just develop a position for the Tlingit language program coordinator. So that's a job. And we could put someone in there and they could do this stuff. Because the other thing is, there's a lot of us trying to do a lot of things, and we want people on board, but we want them to also to pony up the dough. So we want the Tlingit language to be heard on our own land. We want our place names to be used. We want people to understand that this is the indigenous and primary language. And then we also want to create safe spaces for our language. One thing that we noticed is, over time, we have become kind of mean to each other. And someone said, the way they said it, haven't we always eaten our children? I was like, well, that's kind of an interesting way to say it, but yes, we've always been pretty tough, and sometimes you get tough lessons. But I think sometimes with our language too, there's a lot of pain that's coming out, and we're trying to hurt people. So this 30-year plan really comes down to building language nests. The first one opened last year in Yakutat, There's one opening this coming January in Juneau. And these are modeling the Ahapuna Naleo, what we see here. And they're starting very small, but they're making progress. These kids are understanding our language. After that, at Kuditan Hiti, a K through 12 language medium school. That's the vision, maybe starting 2 years from now, because the thing that we really need, then we look over, we need to build more teachers, because at our university, that's a place where you can learn the language. It doesn't have to be the only place, but we want to make sure that people can afford to do it. There's opportunities for everybody who wants to learn, and then there's a plan. So if they learn our language, we can make them into language teachers and then fill these positions as we build these schools. And then a Tlingit adult immersion program similar to what the Mohawk have. So there's a place where we can send folks to go and live in the language. And so that's an option. So you could apply to go and live in a house where Tlingit is the only language spoken. And then that's just because a classroom method is not going to work for everybody. It'll work for some, but it won't work for everybody. Also, we continue to realize that the classroom is exactly where our language was beaten out of people. So the classroom is a traumatic space. So until we can create we want to indigenize some of those spaces. And we also want to create our own spaces so that we can recognize that this is something different, but we also need to have a number of healing ceremonies so that our people can sort of see it as a space similar to this building here, where it's a home for our language. We want to have more of those. Because right now, I don't know if there's a home where Tlingit is the primary language. I don't know if that exists anymore. And so there's homes that are being committed to doing, to raising their children in the language. But what we're trying to do is just make sure to say, the kids will get it, they will understand. They will understand, because sometimes people will switch. They need to say, hey, get away from those stairs, you're gonna fall. Or don't, put that knife down. And you can say it in your language, and you can still have the same sense of urgency. And so these are some of the things that we're trying to work on with our own people back home, and to hopefully help also guide the way for other languages in the state of Alaska, or assist other languages in the state of Alaska. And this includes one of the things that's also in the dissertation is trying to look at things at these 3 levels. The micro level is, what do individuals and families do? How can you affect change within them? How can you get them to decide to use our language? Because it's more about use, I think, than about learning. With people who learn it but don't use it. And so we need to move past that little stopping point. The next level is at the Meso level, which is within the community and the region. What kinds of changes can you make so that things can function, your language can live at those levels? And then the third is at the macro level. So sometimes you're trying to change laws and things at the state and federal level. And we're trying to do things in a targeted way within each of those areas. So at the micro level, we're just trying to get people convinced, give them the tools they need to use their language. If you don't know how to say wipe your butt, we'll teach you how to say that. At the Meso level, we're trying to make sure that our institutions are on board. If we have indigenous groups, they need to be doing their part and say, are you using the language in your office? Do you have some kind of plan? Because I think if it's an indigenous organization or not, some of the things that you could do is say, well, if you speak an Alaska Native language, we consider you more qualified. And it doesn't have to be a whole lot, but you make more money. Because this is and so we see groups like Teslin is a community, inland Tlingit community, and they have recently passed a law that makes the Tlingit language the official language of their government. So we see them leading the way in this regard to say, we can encourage our people to live our language on a daily basis. And so, in conclusion, thinking about this dissertation, it's been a wonderful process. to try and think through what kinds of things can I learn here? What kinds of things can I learn from our Mohawk and Chamorro relatives that we can bring home and implement? And how do we create systematic change at a rapid rate? Because one of the things that happens is a lot of times one of the faults that we may have is we really want to talk about it and talk about it and talk about it until we know what we're doing. But one of our elders also said, you know, if your boat's full of holes, you don't sit there and argue about where you're going to go. You got to get going. And so this is another thing, is trying to really get our folks at home to make a decision, to make a move. And that's primarily what I was trying to do with this dissertation. And I'm very thankful to have this opportunity to have been taught by a lot of people who just who saw something and who just believed that our language should be passed along. Most of the primary teachers I have been really gentle people. They love to tease and to laugh, but they tended not to make fun of people who were trying. They tended not to talk bad about people who were trying. And so I'm really trying to nurture and create some of those environments at a larger level. And I'm just really thankful for these opportunities. Yawa, Chish.
So, I keia manawa e kia manina o Hawaiian nei e homaka na kaninau ana iaia, ina make ke kai haalele, I wame kai ke haalele. So, at this time we're going to have the questions of the candidate. We're going to begin with Dr. Saft and then have questions called in by Professor Williams, and then Professor Kamala, myself, and we'll go around 2 rounds.
Okay.
Yeah. Mahalo nui loa, o maikai loa kau, haiolelo, ka vehevehe ana no kau hana maikai loa, hoi loa, mako kau. So my question, you actually spoke to it a little bit, but I'd like to hear some more. You mentioned as one of the goals, one of the many goals, the diglossia, including kind of the cultural interaction in Tlingit with elders. Mm-hmm. It was one of the things you talked about with diglossia. At the same time, you also talked about some of the problems in terms of getting the elders to actually use Tlingit again. And then you also talked about how you needed these healing spaces as places where the elders, everybody could feel comfortable using the language. What I was wondering, because I know that you yourself have engaged with the elders and have been quite, I believe, successful in getting them to speak and documenting some of their language. I wonder if maybe you have some, from your experiences, have some maybe some thoughts on actual practices that could be used in healing spaces or outside of healing spaces to engage the elder speakers. They're thinking a lot, in long term of having them actually maybe come and participate in your schools and other events that you're.
Mahalo. So one of the things that we realized, we had this language summit last week, and we had about 200 people from all over the place who came together, and we got almost all the Tlingit language speakers that we know of together, and we tried to encourage them to speak. And one of the things that we did realize is, I think there's a process that's lacking right now. And so we think about doing things, as you build institutions and things like that, you can't just always just mimic the colonizer. And so what you have to do is figure out, how does this work for us? And how do we make life better for future generations? And one of the things that we realized is we're getting enough tools and courage and confidence to be able to talk about some of these things publicly, about, I feel bad because I can't speak my language. I feel nervous because I used to always get corrected by my older siblings. One time I spoke and somebody laughed at me because I said this word and it meant something different. But then also these deep, deep wounds. And what we see is sometimes we'll bring those things out and then we'll say, okay, well, what's next on the agenda? And I think what we really need to, and what we've been talking about lately, is trying to figure out a ceremony, which one of my colleagues, Haa Dachx Ishmael Hope, came up with a name for it, which is ʼUna, which is a healing process. And so we have this ceremony called ʻUla, which is a sacred ceremony we've held on to. But similar to our languages, where you can't use your language here, you can't use your language there, says the colonizer, they have also historically said, you can't have that kind of ceremony, you can't have that kind of ceremony. And so a lot of times, the only thing left is your death ceremony. And so what we're trying to do is envision a new ceremony that we can create. It's going to be something different than ʻUla, the potlatch is what some people might call it, or the payoff party, because that is its own thing. And there's people who know how to do that. And if we try to call it that, they're going to come and tell us we're doing our thing wrong. Or what we're really trying to do is come up with a culturally appropriate way to look at things, to put them out there, and to let them go. Because I think what happens now is we're saying, oh yeah, I got all these ugly things in my pocket, let me put them on the table. And then we say, then I will put them back in my pockets, and then I will walk around with them. And so I think we're getting close, but the process that we need now is a ceremony where we actually have it, and we have physical processes in our culture to let go of that and just say, you don't need to carry that around anymore. And the other thing I think we can combine it with is when you learn Tlingit, there's no sort of formal kind of recognition that occurs in our country. And so the things we would like to do is combine this with also a sort of a graduation ceremony, so we can clearly state, you are a beginner, you are an intermediate, you are an advanced, and come up with terms. We were talking about that this morning, about how do we can come up with terms for that, like ʻUnei, the person beginning to learn it. ʻUnei the person beginning to understand it. And then ʻUnei the one who's beginning to master it. And so then we can also formally recognize, say, look at this person. They have put in the time, they're going from this to that. And we can keep closer track of how many learners we have. And so I think combining those two things, doing more of a ritualized process, and also the other thing we talked about is coming up with something similar to the Hawaiian philosophy and language, kind of the language movement philosophy for Tlingit is something that we want to develop that says, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it. Because sometimes we have these meetings where they're like, why? Tell us why. And we're like, we've already written that down. We got it from our elders, they told us. But the other thing is we need some processes in place. So if someone starts, because what's common in Tlingit country is I might start saying something, and a lot of people might not understand, but I'm actually saying something really hurtful about somebody, but I'm doing it in this really indirect way. And I think those are some things we got to figure out, some mechanisms for putting a stop to when we hurt each other, when we're using the language as a weapon instead of as a tool or as something that really helps us, and then having a process. And I think having that agreement between all the folks who are working in Tlingit, having something like that would really help. So a ceremony and also a documented set of cultural protocols.
Okay, now Maria, I hope you can hear us, Maria.
Yes, I hear you very well.
Okay, so this is your turn.
Well, ʼUntitled Chapter for a wonderful presentation and an amazing dissertation. And I just want to applaud all of the hard work that went into this and your journey, your academic journey. And you did this while raising a family and creating curriculum and starting your academic position. So I think you've accomplished a Herculean task. So impressive. So my first question was basically very similar to the question that was just answered. It was this very interesting way that you want to create the safe acquisition environment. And I think that you addressed it very well, not only through this idea of a healing place, but also maybe, as you mentioned, the ritual and the process. So unless there's anything else you want to add to that, I can just go into my second question, which is a little bit more concrete.
Yeah, I guess it's just making sure that our teachers understand that a classroom where you're teaching our language is, you've got to do a little bit of work to create that safe spot, because the one thing that we're finding is we can create, I think we're getting good at creating a space where students can talk. And then we want to be able to sort of transform it so that they can take the idea of it's safe to do this and to take it out into other places. And so we do a lot of work just talking to them, laughing, making sure that they know everybody makes mistakes and that mistakes do not hurt a language and mistakes do not define you. Because sometimes we see people, they're trying to talk and then they're constantly being corrected. So we also try, I think, are developing ways to just sort of say, oh, well, they can self-correct. If we can just get them talking more, they will figure it out. And so just developing processes so that you understand when and how to correct people, to correct with kindness, to also try and make sure that people know that we might laugh about something because someone said fart instead of feather, but you know, we can just say it happened. We don't have to say, oh yeah, well, so-and-so said this, and we should laugh at them. But it's just sort of, we can laugh about stuff. Fun stuff happens.
So my second question, as I mentioned, is a little bit more concrete. So as a Tlingit language instructor, you address, I just would like you to address your approach to the curriculum, the types of curriculum materials you have developed and created for your program and your students. So this is not only the development of curriculum, but also your pedagogical approach.
Hi, ʻUla. So there's a number of different things that we're trying to create. And so specifically, shortly before I entered this program, I had finished a grammar of the Tlingit language, which is called ʻUla, which translates to our language has saved us or healed us. And that came from an elder who was testifying when we were making Alaska Native languages the co-official languages of Alaska. And I heard Kasech, Selena Everson, say that. So trying to think of, we had a beginning Tlingit book that was wonderful, but then just trying to think of what's the next step so that we can say, here's all the parts of the language. Here's how everything works. And then to map that out, and then to use the beginning Tlingit stuff as well, and to try and give that just an update. And so one of the updates was shifting from always having English in there to having lots of images. And so using lots of images to sort of replace the English and to try and utilize some techniques. And so we start by teaching people how to learn the names for things. We're going to teach them the name for this, the name for that. And so we've been trying some different techniques, which is using it a lot, but also because we understand the reality that a lot of our students may not have anybody to talk to, which a lot of our elders said, it's hard for me to talk because I don't have anybody to talk to. So one of the things that we try to do is just create a bunch of different things that they can use on a day-to-day basis. And so the types of curriculum we're developing are both classroom and also here's some things that you can use to live with the language. So we're partnering with a lot of different groups. And another thing in the dissertation was suggesting that we form, similar to what they have here in Hawaii, is a central publishing and production team so that it doesn't have to be any single individual or any single organization that is publishing something, but we have a process on how to get things out there really fast, get them done. Because currently there's a lot of teachers who are making things, and we want life to be easy for teachers. So what we would prefer is that there's a team that knows how to do illustration and graphic design and editing, and they can speak Tlingit, and we just get the ideas to them from the teachers, because the teachers will realize their needs. And we go make the thing, get it to the classroom, get it to everybody as soon as possible. Because another area where I think of in terms of curriculum and pedagogy is we haven't done a great job of like making sure we're all on the same page. So that someone says, hey, you know, I want to make a a poster that has all the colors, because we've done that. We've got to make the next thing. And so trying to centralize the process a little bit would also allow us to have a good idea of what we have, because we have wonderful materials that were made in the 1980s that are probably in the basements of some of our organizations. And we need to make sure that we know what is out there, we know how to utilize that stuff, and then we figure out where the gaps are so we can continue to make things. Because as we start teaching through our language, that's the next step for curricular development in Tlingit country, is having things so we can teach through our language, so that I can teach the rock cycle and the water cycle to my children through the Tlingit language. And so developing a mathematical curriculum. So those are some things that we're at now, is continuing to look at the adults. The advanced Tlingit curriculum is not really there yet. It's pretty fun to go from handing out hundreds of pages to students to having a book that they can have. And so some folks say, well, you don't have to spend all this money and make stuff, because you can just print it at home. And I say, well, our kids will know that our stuff is low quality, and we want to have high quality stuff. We can make books just like anybody else does. So that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, very good. Gunal Chish, thank you.
Hello, Maria. Kawanai.
Okay, mahalo nui
Hi.
hana apoloa keia no later okia kauni. Now, this is my question. In your paper, you introduced the concept of metacognition and surfaced the point that many native governing entities are based on Western and colonial models and spend much time addressing Western approaches to issues such as gender inequality. So how do you see Tlingit language revitalization as advancing distinctive Tlingit organizational structures and distinctive Tlingit approaches to solving the notion of inequality, including gender-based inequality?
Mahalo.
Yeah.
It's a long, difficult road. But as we sort of talked about some of these theories that we can apply, metacognition was something that we liked, because it means you have to be hyper aware of everything. Because I think the colonizer has established white superiority and male superiority to a point where it's just a default. It's just a default. And so these are things on a day-to-day basis I find myself at fault with. So communicating with a female, am I somehow conveying that I think they don't know what they're doing, and just these sort of things. But bigger than that, I think, because that is a big thing. But I think a lot of times a population that is oppressed ends up also oppressing itself. And so what you find is if the people who are oppressing you are misogynist, you might actually end up being more misogynist than the average colonizer, right? And so it's a delicate conversation, because sometimes we have some folks who are Tlingit and are very knowledgeable in perhaps the culture and maybe the language and maybe both, because just because you know the language doesn't mean you know the culture. Just because you know the culture doesn't mean you know the language. Just because the culture is coming back really strong doesn't mean the language is as well, but there's certainly linked. But some of the folks will say, well, this is how Tlingits are. You can't change our culture. And so the other thing that I try to push back on is that indigenous cultures are frozen, because they can change. We used to have slaves and kill them, and we don't do that anymore. And we're probably better for it. But I think the next conversations to have is to say, are we being equitable and fair when it comes to gender? Because the answer is absolutely not. And so this became crystal clear. It was already there in my mind. But we were organizing a meeting where hundreds of people were coming. And we have raven clans and eagle clans, or sometimes they're called crow clans and wolf clans. And if you're going to have something from one, you better have something from the other. And so we were having these 3 keynote speakers at this event. So we kind of strategized. We said, well, we'll get a raven who's an elderly male, and he can give a keynote speech. And then we'll get an eagle who's an elderly female, and she can give a keynote speech. And then we'll get a white guy who's an elderly male because, you know, they've got to have their part too. And, you know, he was a historian. And then somebody said, well, I was taught that if there's a clan leader in the room, a woman's not supposed to talk in public. And I just thought, this guy's a clan leader, so I don't want to, I'm in a tough situation because I want to hear what our women have to say. And I don't know if that's really true, the way that he was conveying it. And if it was, I think then we need to change it. Because one thing that I noticed, right now, there's probably 50 people learning Tlingit at the university. Only 5 of them are Tlingit males. And so one is 10% of the learners are Tlingit males. That's not enough. So my question for the men is, how do we get more men to come in the door? The other thing I notice is of people who can learn, who have learned how to speak the language and can make it, almost all of them are men. So if your learners are, only 10% of your learners are men, but they're all becoming speakers, that means you're doing something to hurt your women. And so the big thing is, are we hurting ourselves? And if so, how do we analyze that? And so I saw this, we had a meeting last week. Hundreds of people gathered about our language. We broke into groups so the women could talk about how do we make it easier for women to speak and what are the things that we need to do. And the men could talk about how do we get more men to come and what do we need to do. And the men, it was, if we met for 90 minutes, it was probably 45 minutes of just angry yelling. And in there, they were saying, we don't talk like women, we're not liars and gossipers. And I had to say, there's something wrong with this conversation. And so for Tlingit people, we are going to have to put that stuff on the table. And we are also going to have to make some cultural conscious shifts to say, maybe that's how we do it, but that's not how we're going to do it anymore. Because what's going to happen is our language is going to die. And what we need to do is we need to make it so that everybody can speak, wants to speak, feels ownership, feels empowered, and that we're protecting spaces and also being conscious of some of the folks who maybe we need to find out how to say, you can come back when you have healed enough to contribute to these conversations without hurting people. Because the things we do now, unfortunately, is someone will lash out and hurt somebody, and we'll just sort of wait until the moment passes and move along. And again, I think we need to get more courageous, put those things on the table, and say, this is why these things are a problem. And I think we can do that through our language, because when this stuff happens, it's also people are switching to English to make these harsh statements.
Mahalo nui. I mean, these are real difficult decisions to make and discussions to be had. So mahalo nui.
Aloha. So now it's my turn, William Wilson. ʻUnei, you discuss how language revitalization also often involves creating an artificial language and then a transition of that artificial language into a natural language. Can you discuss this idea in more detail and possible steps from an artificial stage to a natural stage?
Mahalo, William. I was told I cannot cite him as Pila. So. That's again. And so I really like here when I was studying Hawaiian here, and we talked about it being an artificial language, and we also talked about how languages change. And Tinek Pangi says, I speak my grandmother's language, but I don't speak like my grandmother. So there's part of it where languages just change over time. Like in English, we didn't unfriend anybody, or those types of things where the vocabulary just changes. But also, as it's sometimes disorienting for some of our elderly speakers to see people learning Tlingit, because to be honest, there was a period of about 40, 50 years where it just didn't happen anymore. So one, we didn't see babies speaking, and we didn't see adults learning how to speak. And so to try and bridge that gap, some of the times what we do is we really try to remind our community. We say, when you have a baby and they start talking, whatever language it is, everybody's always so happy. Oh, this is so cute. How they said They didn't change the irregular verb, right? And then, but when adults make those mistakes, we kind of condemn them. And we kind of, because one thing that I think colonizing English tends to do is the ways that people talk is also reflects not only where they're from and what their social status is, but sometimes how intelligent other groups might believe they are. And so you'll see this when people are arguing online and they, instead of talking about the topic, they're saying, you used the wrong there, so you're dumb. But for our languages, some of the things that we try to do is we try to tell our learners, you are learning an artificial form of Tlingit. So if I say, what's that you do, if you spoke the language fluently, you'd probably just, if you were me, you'd probably say, ʻUnei. But then if you're learning, you say, ʻUnei you do, right? So you learn like, my name is. We also tend to exaggerate some things because Tlingit has tones. So things can be a high tone, low tone. So when we're teaching it higher than it usually is. We also have these things that go and we sometimes push those things out harder than they would usually go. And we say, we're teaching you how to do this because maybe you haven't done this before. And then you could pull it back later. We're teaching you these structures. And we also I try to teach students, I say, I'm going to teach you these different components of the language. But don't think you know more than your grandpa because he says, I don't know what a suffix is. Like, that doesn't matter, right? But then we say, we can put you on a path where we can get to the point where it's fine-tuning and adjustments. But I push back on the idea that people are doing it wrong if they're saying it wrong. And I try to really even push away from the whole idea of right and wrong, which I think is sometimes used as a way to gatekeep cultural knowledge and also language knowledge. And so we see it in the form of cultural bullying, where people will make fun of them and they'll laugh and they might smile when they see them, but they're saying pretty harsh things about them as learners. We've been labeled as college Tlingit. Like, you don't want to go learn that college Tlingit. And I'm fine with that because we say, yeah, we teach them this form of Tlingit that is artificial, but we have learners that they started their path with us. And we say, we'll teach you these, but you gotta go to the old people and just talk to them because that's where you're gonna get the cadence and the thought world and these other things. And I believe we're putting people on that path. We do have some naysayers out there who chew on hater salad and drink haterade. And that's bound to happen. But then we just say, well, if you could just get on board and be supportive and helpful and talk to them. Because what also happens at these language summits is people pull me out in the hallway, talk to me in English for 45 minutes about how we're doing it wrong, while all the language stuff is going on in the big room. So I just think we've got to push back on some of those ideas, but we also have to not be rigid. So we say, we know everything, we know what we're doing. But I do think it's a process that we try to be pretty transparent about. We also try to say the language is not, it doesn't, there are components where I think there's a spiritual side of the language. We say, we'll teach you all this stuff, you gotta go talk to your old people, you gotta go make the language out on the land, because then your ancestors come talk to you in your dreams. And so there are components of it that are very spiritual, but then we just try to say, well, there's a process here, and it's okay if you sound funny, because the most important thing is you could speak this highly endangered language, and I know what you're trying to say. That's always such a beautiful moment for me.
Scott?
Yeah, I have a question that actually kind of builds on that question. That's not from the list. I hope that's not illegal. But but one of the many beautiful things about your dissertation, one of the beautiful things is that you included some passages that are transcriptions. You've transcribed from some of the recordings that you've made of the elder speakers. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about how those might be incorporated into the teaching of Tlingit, especially you mentioned about how the advanced classes still need to be developed. And I'm also asking because, we're going through a similar type of thinking here because we have Larry's his radio recordings that are working on the transcriptions and the digitizing them, and I know some of our language teachers are incorporating them and thinking about ways to incorporate them. But I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah. So my auntie Nora Dowenhauer and also my clan daughter Kahani Rosita Worrell were kind of at the forefront with several others, Johnny Marks, and where they were Tlingit people recording other Tlingit people. So it started with anthropologists usually who would come and want to record folks, and Frederica de Laguna has lots, and George Emmons had some, and I think John Swanton. And then there were some Tlingits who would just record themselves. But the first thing I think about is how Nora told me when she first started going to record people, they didn't like it. The old people at that time, they didn't like to hear themselves. They thought it was very strange. But then they realized what was happening with the language. How it was getting, that was a generation that saw it go through this incredible decline where you go from thousands of speakers to just hundreds. And so she said it wasn't long before she was getting calls from her auntie who would say, your uncle's on his deathbed. He wants you to record him one last time. So then it became this sort of thing that people got used to. And so as I talked to her especially, and also to Rosita about, well, I want to make these recordings as well. There's folks now, and so what I found is sometimes it would be hard, and they didn't know what to say, and so, but I found if you could talk to them in Tlingit, and if you could show them that, because once they see in your eyes that you don't understand anymore, a lot of times they'll just kind of wrap it up. But then to just sort of be able to follow them, and then also to start off by speaking Tlingit to them and just saying things like, Dasai te wasagui de Sáani Kagéiyi Yís, what ha'in kaini gia qahastu idegachtutu. What do you want your grandchildren to know? Because maybe if you tell us, we'll teach it to them. We'll teach them the language. And so that tended to unlock some things. And we also documented stories and histories, and we started asking them, what do the learners need to hear for inspiration? And then that's where a lot of those things in the dissertation came from. But we've had some debates as well. And so my take has been, if it's all in the language and there's no translation, it's fully encrypted, right? Nobody could do anything with that unless they know Tlingit. So put it on the internet, make it available. If there's a translation, then maybe we need to talk about, does it have sensitive information? Because if it talks about where to get the best food, then people are going to go take all of it. And if it talks about where like one of our medicine people is buried, somebody's going to go dig them up. And so we know how the colonizers' world has continued to take things from us. But our belief is my belief anyways, is to just put it out there, to make it available. And we know that some communities don't have reliable internet access, and so we're trying to envision projects where we can get the language to them. But we know the reality is that there's several villages that have 0 speakers. And we also know that when I was born, shortly after I was born, my great-grandfather passed away. But I was able to listen to him speak our language because Nora Dowenhauer recorded him. And so just when I first heard it and I could understand him, I remember I was crying because I thought, wow, this was almost totally gone from my family. And now I can understand what he's saying. And I can understand, I can hear the dynamic between him and his wife, and also with Nora. And he had this really neat thing that there's no voiced L in Tlingit, but he had one, and so did one other speaker. And they used it regularly. They would use it whenever there was an N. So his name was Bert Dennis, and he called himself Bud Dellis. And so, and that, we have a wealth of that. And we also use that to try and to teach folks how to transcribe and translate Tlingit. So we say, you write down what they say. And I'm really grateful that I was taught how to do that. I did that a lot with Nora in her final years of life. And I remember I was translating and I said, well, what does that mean? She said, it's your turn. I was like, oh, okay, let me tell you what I think it means and stuff.
Thank you.
Maria, do you have another question? Or
No, I'm good.
okay, mahalo nui.
Okay. So I have one other. So given your experience here with us, with our Hawaiian language revitalization efforts, and what you know about what's going on with Tlingit language revitalization, what are some areas that you see as you're having as an advantage over what we're doing in Hawaiian, and maybe could suggest ways that we can learn from what you're doing in revitalizing the Tlingit language?
Boy, that's a tough question, because it seems like you guys got it all. My hope is that we're going to figure out a way to ease some of the divisions, and sometimes these divisions are long-standing. This person has always hated this person because that person's mom has hated that person's dad, and so on. And sometimes you have these organizational rifts that sometimes can be really destructive to language learning, because then individuals have to decide kind of whose side that they're on. And I don't know if we're getting over that, but I feel like we're getting kind of close. And I'm hoping that's something that can lead the way with a lot of people to say, this language revitalization movement is bigger than everybody. It's bigger than individuals, it's bigger than the groups, because I've heard from Hawaiian folks that I meet, because I just praise you guys publicly and talk about the things that you're trying to do. And then sometimes people say, well, those Larry guys think they're so much better than us because they know the language. And I think, oh, wow, I want to figure out how do we do that? How do we build a language movement that is inclusive, but also is sort of the place where people want to be? And this is one of the struggles we have at home. As I say, let's make it the best place to be. So if you're serving, the cheap coffee over there where they're speaking English, and we've got the gourmet blend over here where people are speaking Tlingit, and it's not that we think we're better, it's just we want this environment to be the place where our people choose to go. And we want this to be the thing that our people understand as their default existence. And I don't know how we get there, but that's what we're trying to get to. So that when people, because we get this at home too, where someone will say, hey, you should learn our language. You should learn Tlingit. You're a Tlingit person. And they'll say, well, you should learn to fish, and you should get the land back, and you should. And so it's always like this counter argument. And so what I'm hoping is that we can elevate within our organizations that the language becomes this top priority, and that hopefully we can lead the way and work with folks and say, how do we do that? How do we get it so that these groups are working together? Because sometimes with us, we've seen it's been personality warfare more than sort of an ideology conflict. And so that's what I would hope we can offer.
Hallelujah. We can always learn more.
Okay, so my other question that I had kind of planned on, I kind of heard quite a bit from you, I felt that it was kind of related to it, and I don't really feel a need to ask it. But I wanted to say before we open it up to maybe I should just, I'll bring that question like at the end, after everyone asks their question. I'd like to hear if you have anything else that you'd like to say. But I think maybe we should hear from other people who want to ask questions before you give that kind of a summary. So I think what I'll do is open it up first to whoever is out there in, the rest of the world listening in. If they have a question, we'd be very happy to include it in our defense. So is someone out there who'd like to ask a question? And you can ask it in Tlingit, or you can ask it in English, or of course Hawaiian.
Anybody out there have a question?
We'll take that for we're thinking about it, and we'll open it up to the audience here. And if someone does have a question afterwards, after we complete the questions from the audience here, we'll also let that person ask.
Okay.
Okay, so we ask though that if you do have a question to please come forward so that we can record the questions to be part of our record of the, no. So please come forward and stand by Scott's staff so that the mic here can pick it up.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, come. Mic. You know, clink it or,
Director is over there, Director Kaliko. Mahalo, ʻUlei, nui loa na mana'o. Ka, there's one little area question that I have, and I know you've already started something, but I didn't quite hear you mention it, so maybe you could. You kind of alluded to it, I think, with this beautiful building that you were describing. So I believe that's going to be a reality, because you mentioned January or June, was it? And my question is, have you had a kind of a dry run about how many staff and how many children, how many, possible, a dry run, or you're just going to open and see what happens?
Yeah, so there's a language nest that opened in Yakutat in January of last year, and I think they started with 6 teachers and maybe 12 children, and they go about 3 to 4 hours a day, 4 times a week. And then in Juneau, we're trying to sort of look at them, and they took the summer off, and then they recently have started to open back up again this week. And so in Juneau, we're going to spend the next couple months or the next month and a half talking with them about what has worked, and then figure out what our schedules could be in Juneau. And so one of the things that was a difficulty was we were getting some oversight in Juneau from folks who run daycares. And they're trying to run it like a daycare. They say you need 30 kids, you need to go 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day. And then we thought, I don't know if we're ready for that, because the other thing too is the reality is trying to realize, do we have a critical mass that can actually just fully function in the language? And so there is a reality that a number of our teachers in our language nest may not be 100% fluent. They know the language, but what we're hoping is that this does open the door to just saying, okay, now you have to say it. You have to use the language now. And that we can get some folks that maybe know a lot and we know they can speak, but for whatever reason, it's hard for them. And we're hoping that this environment will help. I mean, the danger is that it just becomes this cultural program. And once somebody starts speaking English, it's just really hard to push back that flood, which we saw last week as well at our language summit, was people would start speaking English and we just have a really hard time stopping them. But I think having this physical space that's dedicated for it certainly helps. And just to say, this is not, we can have scheduled visits and we can work with parents, but it's also not where anybody can just go. And it also allows us to sort of begin addressing another really difficult thing is there's a lot of folks who know our language, but there are a few who know our language who are not appropriate to be around children. And so this also gives us some good measures for not just this, for other language gatherings, because I think as a Tlingit community, one thing that we have failed to do is to adequately address appropriate and inappropriate behavior, especially if men are in positions of power and then young women are around. Like, you just have to have very clear, I think, protocols. Those are some of the things that we want to develop. But having that language nest going, I visited the one in Yakutat 4 times, and then just sort of looking at how they're doing that and how the kids are responding and how the teachers are responding. So far, it's been very positive.
Umonino Wakuane.
Aloha.
Aloha.
First, I really want to congratulate you for a really fine presentation. I think just so well grounded in all of the areas of your discipline that you've been studying. And these visuals that have just really very simply put together some really complex thinking theories that you put together, layered with your ideas of what you do with that. I find them very, very interesting. And it got me thinking about your 4 pillars of those areas in your 30-year plan. And what kinds of resources, language, ʻŌlelo resources that you're going to need, and other kinds of resources to help move each of those 4 pillars in your 30-year plan moving. There's obviously some leftover, but obviously some very different directions. So my question to you is, with your, if I heard right, about 20 very fluent speakers you have left, and others that are speakers at some level of percentage, what do you feel are the 3 most critical pieces of resources, ʻŌlelo resources, that you need to gather in preparation for moving those 4 pieces in your 30-year plan that you don't have right now?
Mahalo. Well, I just want to thank you, Kiki, for always inspiring me and seeing your presentations and hearing about your work. And also you, Larry, and for housing us and feeding us. And that was the place to party. And so thinking of, we realize this, and sometimes we have these debates about what should we do? And so sometimes we say, well, we should just focus on creating some highly fluent speakers because the other thing with Tlingit is there's kind of day-to-day Tlingit, and then there's this elevated form of Tlingit, which is people who can do the oratory, tell these big stories, make big speeches. And we think we only have about 3 or 4 left that can really do that. And so as we strategize, we're also going to have to figure out those next ones who are going to have to take it to that level. Because some of it is grammar too. Like there's these, when you study the Raven stories, it's really hard to translate because whenever they quote Raven, he says some really outrageous things. I'm like, nobody talks like that. Nobody. Just the way that he puts these things together. And so we're going to have to send a team that's going to go become that next group that can tell stories and do that oratory and take it to this high level. Now, I have a feeling that if you just went way back in a time machine and you knew Tlingit and you just hung out with Tlingit people, I think you'd probably find like maybe 1 out of every 100 people could actually do that stuff. And so I think we're going to end up with maybe a similar ratio, but maybe a little bit higher. But then to continue to get us ready for these types of things, we're also, I think something that I noticed is we put out these really neat refrigerator magnets and posters that talk about Tlingit values, and we put them on our fridge, but we don't necessarily live them, right? And so trying to make sure that we have a value structure that lives and breathes within this whole language revitalization movement, so that we can when we talk about having respect for all things, that we just know that, and that we're able to convey a lot of information about our kids. Because if our kids go to public school, they might not necessarily have teachers who know that you're not supposed to talk bad about the bears especially, but other animals, and you're not supposed to laugh at animals, and you're not supposed to, there's all these different things that we need to also teach that become naturalized through our languages. So that's probably another thing so thing number 1 was making sure that we have this set of highly fluent speakers that are going to hold on to that form of oratory. 2 is making sure that our language reflects our value system, and we're not just translating the colonial world, which is a real danger. And so one of the things that we're trying to do in that regard is to continue just make a bunch of kids' books and stories and stuff, because I read to my kids every night, and I'm tired of sheep and pigs and chickens, and I'm just like, I don't care about these chickens anymore. And so I was in Hawaii this morning, I saw chickens and pigs, and I was like, oh yeah, I don't see those in Juneau. The bears would be like, thank you, those were delicious. And so, and then I guess thing number 3, the third sort of thing to look at this is to find ways to elevate our people so that they believe in themselves and so that we can call out structural racism when we see it. Because the ways that we see it is sometimes someone was running for the school board in Juneau and they got elected, and somebody asked them while they were running, one of my students said, can I miss class tonight to go see the school board debate? I said, well, you have to ask them this question. Do you support a Tlingit language medium school or a Tlingit language immersion school? And so he did, and he asked them. And some of the candidates said yes, and some of them said no. One of them said no, because you can't teach science in Tlingit. And nobody called him out. In a room full of people, nobody said, racists, because you don't know Tlingit. You don't know Tlingit, and you don't know about that. But he's qualified by the fact that the structural racism exists at such a broad level. So I guess that the last one would be a complex thing, so that our people feel empowered, confident, that they understand this is something that they can do, should do, will do, and that we will help them do, and that the colonial world around us knows that if they're going to be ugly, we're going to punch them in the throat, I think is how we were saying it.
Some other place.
Any more questions? Here in Hawaii? No more? Again, the people who are listening in, anyone have
I think I have 3. Wouldn't mind hearing more about this is from Cheat Wu. I wouldn't mind hearing more about your approach to pedagogy, how power is shared when teaching or learning language. How do you see yourself in relation to other speakers and learners? So one of the things that I've tried to do, because I get hired to teach, I get hired to develop materials, and what I try to do is say, I insist that they put something in there in my contract that says anything I make must also be made freely available online. And anything I make, other people can use and manipulate, because I've been accused of plagiarizing our language and stealing other people's materials. And I really don't think that there's a place for that. I think you need to acknowledge whose work you're doing, and I hope I've become better at doing that. But I really like saying our language is something that none of us can claim, because I see people bullying other people. I see people trying to sort of get mad when someone else is doing well. And those are some things where we've got to just overcome some of this pettiness. And when it comes to developing materials, to try and make them available, to make the classes available. I mean, ideally for people who are already in poverty, why would we want to charge them so much money to learn their language? And some folks have said to us, like, I feel like I have to be a good college student in order to succeed at my language, and that bothers me. And I want to be receptive to that. And so we've tried to develop some community intensives where it says, if you can get a week off, 2 weeks off, 3 weeks off, we'll be there. You can go with us all day long. It won't cost you anything. So we've been piloting those learning opportunities in Teslin and Carcross and Whitehorse. There's another question, speak toward a Tlingit research methodology. This is from Ida Heather Burge, or how you envision a PhD graduate program manifesting for Tlingit learners, taking what you have learned participating in the Hawaiian program, and how to incorporate that knowledge and your experience in the Western academic system. How do you see decolonization happening in the university system? And so, yeah, with that, currently there are no graduate options that involve continuing to study the Tlingit language. And so hopefully we'll have some PhDs who are working in Tlingit and will be able to develop that. And so that we can say, well, the next step is probably going into either teaching or translation, because Tlingit is one of the most well-documented languages as far as endangered languages. But fewer than 1% of the total Tlingit that's been recorded has been translated and transcribed. So there's tons of stuff sitting there that we should be doing some work in. And then hopefully what we're able to do is to develop one of the thoughts, because I don't want to take Tlingit somewhere that our other languages in Alaska cannot go. And so in some regards, it may not be the same thing as you have here in Hawaii, where you can just, it's one language across the state, and there's some differences, but you can build this one thing. And so for us, we've got 20 languages over a very wide area that is supremely colonized in their ways of thinking a lot of times in terms of institutions and the people running them. So the thought right now is to try and develop a college of Alaska Native languages, and that college would then house all of the language teachers in the University of Alaska system. We can then say, this is how much it costs to pay us. If you fund it this amount, we don't have to charge tuition for these classes. And then to encourage normalization by saying everybody who graduates from high school or college should take 1 semester of an Alaska Native language. But then also to say, we are making speakers and teachers of our languages, and to try and develop a program that does just that, because we have education programs in Alaska, but they currently do not allow you to continue to study your language. And it's going to be impossible if you took a year or 2 off to go become a teacher, and then suddenly like your own language skills have diminished because you haven't been speaking because you're so busy becoming a teacher. And then you go into these systems where your language is really marginalized anyways. And so it's sort of a systematic overhaul that a group of us have been trying to envision that does involve developing specific agencies within the state of Alaska and within the University of Alaska system to handle it. And then it says from Jacques Alice Taff, in your dissertation, you write there are 4 linguists doing linguistic fieldwork in the language, although none of them are currently immersed in the language community. What do these linguists need to do so that you would consider them immersed in the language community? That's a good question. I think be at more language immersion events, at language intensive learning opportunities, to be there with us when we're developing, because we're going to need administrators, we're going to need grant writers, we're going to need all kinds of folks who maybe don't want to be teachers who could be in there. And I think the linguists in Tlingit, they contribute tremendously by documenting our language and by allowing us who are teaching to further develop our own understanding of how the language works and how we can get there. But we want to sort of not have linguists who kind of float in and float out, and then they themselves get tenured and other fantastic things. We want them to just be with us and be part of us. And I know that relationship could sometimes be strained and challenging, but hopefully that's what I would envision, though. Any other?
I'd like to say that we really appreciate all the questions that have been asked. We've kind of moving on in time, so I'd like to encourage everyone who'd like to talk to ʻUnei afterwards, here and also in Alaska and other things. He's very active in social media, I know too, so he has a lot to share with everyone. But at this time, I believe it's appropriate that our committee have our meeting to discuss. Oh yes, I forgot. I said that any kind of closing thoughts or things that you'd like to say in terms of the dissertation?
Just that I just happen to be the one with the pen or the hands on the keyboard. I think I talk to a lot of people in and out of Tlingit, ʻUnei, and here in Hawaii about what we should do. And I just really appreciate the opportunities that I was given here at Ke Haka ʻUla o Keʻeliko lani and Nawahi and Aha Punana Leo. And just as I got to know some of you guys, early in the dissertation was a picture of when I first came over here. And I was at a table with these incredible leaders in language revitalization movements. And then talking with Richard and Nora back home and others, And as our fluent speakers, especially the ones that I worked with a lot, began to walk away from us and we would lose them, I really wanted us to have a better plan and a better sense of what we're doing. And it's hard work. I think for those who are venturing out into this world and want to do something similar, just know that the people will be sharpening their arrows. But I was told that if they're not shooting arrows at you, that you're not doing a damn thing. So I'm just very thankful that my wife did so much with our kids while I was here, and that they were fortunate to come over here a number of times, but it did require me to sort of retreat into the writing den, and I've just been blessed with a lot of support, with wonderful students who would read my work and talk about it and think about it, and many of the students that I've been teaching have become colleagues as they go on into their graduate studies or teaching. And I just hope that there's a future for Tlingit where there's a lot less anger about what's going on and a lot more excitement. And that was one of the things I was hoping to convey here today. Chish, mahalo.
Mahalo. So, we'll contact Maria. Okay. Leila no ka hano hano o ka ho'olauna ana ia o koe ki a naina nānā. Ke ia mea nona ka ke kekele lai ʻUla. It's my honor to introduce to the group here in Hawaii and to Maria and everyone else who's listening, Dr. Kagéiyi Lance Twitchell.
Yake hawes te kat Johan. Kachwasash te kachateti. Gas te katwa yu katangi data ya ye chi nei. Ewa ach kakas. Ach sani has. Ach at has. Ach ish has. Ach lak has kach kla has. Ach shilko has oe ach in hasati yudat. Chakhawe Kakhwa Kakwa Ka Yukatangi Dati Chakhanei Haa Dachx Sáani Kagéiyi Yís. Hastayagi ya data ya yutuchatanidat. Yewe chakasachantin yagachtutlaq. Yewe tlaantin ya yagachtutlaq. Hatechtuyen kati aya wetlaan kakasachan. Akaha yukatangi ya kegachtatsin. Wasa aktuye keyuhan. Ya tlaan aya yi atwaskuko ya GDT. Yewe yichukaya yechatwati qaachtu yitlatai. Tle ach nakasu at away ach ish qach klahas qach kik. Yewe chat yisanech away yukatangitin qa yejene. Kachunach away ach tu yek Gurchish, Yewa.
Congratulations, Dr. Twitchell.
I. One chest together. I feel it. Everybody.
Kaliko.